after putting $6 million into a trust for my 3 children, I thought I had finally fulfilled the promise I had made to myself when I was young. 2 weeks later, my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "None of them are yours." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She even smiled slightly, as if she had just told me something she had been waiting years to say. But before we get to that Sunday, I have to take you back to the beginning. My name is Nathaniel Ashford, although everyone calls me Nate. I'm 62 years old, and I was born in North Houston. At 19, I started as an apprentice pipe fitter. I worked with my hands for decades. In 1997, I opened my own company with 2 trucks, a small rented shop, and a phone I answered myself. 26 years later, the company had hundreds of employees, and I finally sold it. I never inherited money. I built it, dollar by dollar, weld by weld. And one of the reasons I worked so hard was my 3 children. Bryce was 34. Daniel was 31. Imani, my youngest daughter, was 20. I wasn't a perfect father. I missed games, school meetings, and far too many Saturdays because of work. But there was one thing that never failed. I was always there when they truly needed me. Every first day of school for years, I personally drove my children in my work truck. Sometimes I still had grease on my clothes. To me, they were my reason. That's why, when the time came to sell my company, I decided to do something I had been planning for a long time. I didn't want my children to wait until I died to receive something. So I created an irrevocable trust and put $6 million into it, divided equally among the 3 of them. The attorney explained several times that once I signed it, it would be very difficult to take the money back. I told him precisely, that's why I want to do it. I want them to know what belongs to them. That night, I gathered my children at home. I told them that everything I had built would someday be theirs. Bryce hugged me from behind my chair. Daniel smiled. Imani barely looked up from her phone. I didn't think anything of it. I thought it had been a perfect night. 2 weeks later, my 34-year marriage finally broke apart. My wife and I had already been drifting apart for years. After I sold the company, I was home much more often, and that's when I understood something no one had ever explained to me. Maybe work hadn't just been my way of making money. Maybe it had also been holding together a marriage that was already broken. A small argument turned into a conversation about divorce. I said something I still remember, but I said then, "At least I know I gave my children more than my father could give me." She became completely still. Then she said, "They aren't your children." I thought I had heard her wrong. "What did you say?" She looked directly at me. "None of the 3 are yours, Nathaniel." I felt the air disappear from the kitchen. Then she added something that still hurts even more. "And you can't get the money back, can you?" In that moment, I understood why she had waited exactly 2 weeks to tell me. It wasn't a confession. It was a strategy. She knew I had just signed an irrevocable trust, and she believed the money was already out of my reach. I didn't argue. Now, we'll tree to... I took my keys, left the house, and drove for hours without knowing where I was going. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I did the only thing I could do. I needed to know the truth. I went to a private laboratory to get a paternity test. Sitting in that small waiting room, with a form in front of me, I had to write the names of my own children as if they were simply the names of potential relatives. I had all 3 tested. For the next 9 days, I kept working as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was destroyed. Every night, I remembered their faces. Bryce's hands. Daniel's laugh. Imani's stubbornness. All my life, I had found pieces of myself in them. I wanted to believe my wife was lying. Then, one morning, I received an email. I opened the document inside my truck. I read the first result. Probability of paternity, 0%. I opened the second. The same. I opened the third. Again 0. Beneath each result was the same phrase. Excluded as the biological father. 3 children. 3 tests. No possibility that I was their biological father. But the worst part hadn't happened yet. I thought the greatest pain would be discovering that I didn't share their blood. I was wrong. The real blow was waiting inside my own home, and I still didn't know that my children had already known the truth for years. I decided I wasn't going to let the biological truth destroy a family I had built over decades. That's what I thought while sitting in my truck, with the 3 DNA results on my lap. I thought about Bryce when he was 16, and I taught him how to drive a manual transmission truck. I thought about Daniel coming home from school. I thought about Imani, who was still a little girl when she used to hug me every time I came home from work. Blood could say one thing, but I knew what I had lived. So I called my 3 children and asked them to come home on Saturday. I wanted to tell them the truth myself. My wife was already out of the house, so I made coffee and placed the documents face down on the table. When they arrived, Bryce came in first. Daniel came behind him, and Imani came directly from college. I looked at all 3 of them, and I felt my voice almost break. I explained that I had taken a DNA test. I told them that all 3 results had come back negative. Then I told them something I needed them to hear. This doesn't change how I feel about you. I raised you, I loved you, and to me, you are still my children. I expected tears. I expected surprise. I expected one of them to ask me why. But Bryce simply looked at me and said, "Dad, we already knew." I thought I had misunderstood him. "What did you say?" He lowered his eyes toward his phone. "We've known for years." I felt something inside me stop. Bryce explained that he had taken a genetic test years earlier. When he was finishing his studies, the results didn't match me. He asked his mother, and she told him the truth. That had happened in 2019, 6 years before I discovered everything. I looked at Daniel. He admitted that he had known since 2020. Then I asked the question that still burns inside me. Why didn't any of you tell me? Bryce said their mother had asked them to keep quiet. According to them, they didn't want to destroy my life. They said they were protecting me. But then I heard something that completely changed the way I saw everything. It wasn't only that they had hidden my true paternity. They had hidden it while I continued working, building the company, and preparing a future for all 3 of them. For 6 years they had called me Dad while knowing I wasn't their biological father. For 6 years they had accepted my love, my time, and my money, and none of them thought I deserved to know the truth. Then I looked at Imani. She was sitting silently. Her face had lost all its color. "I didn't know," she said. She looked at Bryce. "You knew." Bryce tried to justify it. "You were only 14. Imani stood up. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply walked out the door. And I was left there with 2 adult children who seemed more upset that I had made the situation uncomfortable than by the fact that they had hidden the truth from me for years. That was when I realized I needed more than a DNA test. I needed to know what had happened to my money. I went to an attorney who specialized in estate planning and inheritance litigation. Her name was Marion. I handed her the 3 results and then placed the trust documents on the table. She studied them for several minutes. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. That's exactly what I need." She explained that suing my wife simply because she had hidden the paternity issue would be complicated. But the trust was different. I had created it based on a fundamental belief that these 3 were my children, and my wife knew they weren't. She knew before I signed. She knew when I put the $6 million into the trust. Marion pointed to the document. "If we can prove that you were induced to create the trust through fraud, we may have a chance." I asked her what we needed. She answered, "Evidence." Then she paused. "And if your adult children also knew the truth before receiving the money, that changes the case considerably." I remembered exactly what Bryce had said. "We've known since 2019. Marion looked at me. "Which is nie dan by friends." He said that in front of his siblings? "Yes." She closed the folder. "Then we're not going to make speeches. We're going to request the records." Over the next several months, my attorney requested phone records and messages related to what had happened. I expected to find a conversation or 2. I wasn't prepared to find 6 entire years. The documents arrived in a huge folder, hundreds of pages of dated messages and conversations I had never seen. And there, among those papers, was proof that everything had been far more calculated than I had imagined. In one of the first messages, Bryce wrote to Daniel after learning from his DNA test that I wasn't their father. Daniel asked whether they should tell me. Then came a sentence that made me understand why they had kept silent. They didn't want to lose what they were going to receive. But there was still another message that completely destroyed any remaining doubt. It was from my wife, and it directly discussed the trust. She told them to let me do it, that it was all I ever talked about. Then came another message, sent only a few months before I signed. Bryce warned the others not to act strangely around me because I was finishing preparations for the trust. When I read those words, I understood something terrible. They hadn't been protecting me. They had been waiting for me to sign, waiting for the money to become difficult to reach, waiting because they believed I would never discover the truth. But they had made one mistake. They had put everything in writing, and that folder of messages was about to change what happened to the 6 million. The folder contained more than 200 pages, and for the first time since everything began, I felt that the truth was on my side. Not because I wanted to punish my children, not because I wanted the money back, but because I could finally prove that my trust had been exploited. My attorney, Marion, didn't need to make grand speeches. The messages spoke for themselves. One showed that Bryce had known the results of his DNA test years earlier. Another proved that Daniel knew too. And then there was the message from my wife discussing the trust. After that came an even more recent message. Bryce knew I was preparing the trust and had warned them not to do anything strange around me. That meant that when I was sitting in that office signing the documents, believing I was securing my children's future, they already knew a truth that could have changed my decision. But they chose to remain silent. The negotiation didn't last long. At the meeting, my attorney and I sat across from my wife, Bryce, and Daniel, and their attorney. At first, everyone stood firm. Then their own attorney began reviewing the folder again. About 40 minutes passed. Then he asked for a recess. He walked into the hallway with his clients. When they returned, Daniel was crying. Bryce couldn't look me in the eyes. The attorney understood something they hadn't wanted to accept. A jury wouldn't simply see a man who had discovered that he wasn't the biological father of his children. They would see hundreds of pages demonstrating that these people knew the truth and chose to hide it while he signed a 6 million trust. The trust was dissolved. The 6 million returned to my control. There was no dramatic moment in a courtroom. No judge pounding a gavel. Instead, their attorney explained what would probably happen if we took everything before a jury. And they agreed. The divorce followed its own course. After 34 years of marriage, my wife ended up living in a small apartment. I saw her only once after that. It was at a grocery store. We ran into each other in one of the aisles like two strangers who had once shared an entire life. I asked her one question. Why didn't you ever tell me? She looked at me and replied, Why would you have left? I said, I never would have abandoned the children. She answered, You wouldn't have abandoned the children? I didn't need to say anything else. Finally, I understood. She knew I wouldn't leave the children I had raised. The man who had indirectly been part of my life for decades also entered the picture. His name was Roland. He had been a friend of ours for many years. He had attended family gatherings. He had even held Daniel when he was a baby. My wife had maintained a relationship with him for years. All 3 children were biologically his. Bryce and Daniel eventually met him. According to what they told me, one of the first things he asked was whether there was money involved. That was it. After decades of secrets, the man who shared their blood only wanted to know whether there was anything he could receive. But one person did something completely different. Imani decided to take her own test. She didn't tell me. She went to the laboratory alone and waited for the results. Days later, she came to my house with the envelope still sealed. She wanted to open it with me. I told her she didn't have to. She replied, I know. We opened the result. It also said that I wasn't her biological father. When IMD Diaz was said his problem. Imani remained silent for several seconds. Then she looked at me. There's something I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. I thought she was talking about the result, but she continued. I don't care who my biological father is. I know who my dad is. Then she started crying. After that, she became angry. Not with me. With her brothers. With her brothers. Bryce had known when she was 14. Do you know what I did when I was 14? She said. She reminded me of something I still had. A small clay object she had made for me on Father's Day. I made that for you, she said, and he knew the truth while I was making it. She was only 20 years old, and she decided to distance herself from her mother. There was no huge fight. She simply stopped answering her calls. For months, She did something I will never forget. She traveled from college to my house almost every other weekend. She didn't come to talk about money. She didn't come to ask me for anything. Sometimes, she simply sat with me. One morning, she found me in the workshop, sitting on a bucket and doing nothing. She sat beside me. We stayed there for about 40 minutes without speaking. Then she asked, "Do you want a sandwich?" That was Imani. She didn't need to share my blood to know that I was her father. Meanwhile, Bryce came back months later. He invited me to lunch. He arrived carrying a folder. He had a business project and wanted me to invest money. He talked about opportunities, projections, and how the family needed to move past everything that had happened. But he never said, "I'm sorry for hiding the truth from you for 6 years." He said he regretted how things had turned out. That wasn't the same thing. I reminded him of the day I taught him to drive. I reminded him how he cried when he couldn't handle the truck. I told him, that was real. No one can take that memory away from me. But I also told him, for 6 years, you sat at my table knowing something I didn't know. And when I finally found out, you were upset because I had made the situation uncomfortable. I didn't invest in his business. I walked away. Daniel came later. He cried. He told me, "You were the only father I ever had." I looked at him and replied, "I know. And that's precisely why it hurts so much. Because the truth was simple. If they had told me 6 years earlier, 'Dad, we need to talk,' I would have cried. I would have needed time. But the next morning, I would have made breakfast, and they would still have had their share of the money. They didn't hide the truth because it was too painful. They hid it because telling me could cost them money. That was the part I could never forgive. Today, I live in a smaller house. I have a workshop behind it, and I do some work from time to time. More because I need something to do than because I need the money. I also did something I had always wanted to do. I put $2 million into a scholarship fund for young apprentices from my old union. Every year, several young men and women receive tools and financial assistance to begin their careers. When I was 19, my father couldn't afford to buy me a set of tools. A man I barely knew lent me his. I never forgot it. Now I want to do the same for someone else. And Imani finished college and started working at a hospital. She is, without a doubt, the most decent person I know. Even when I wanted to pay off some student debt she had, she refused. She didn't want anyone to say she stayed with me because of money. I paid it anyway. She was angry with me for 2 days. Then she called me again the following Sunday. That's what people who truly love you do. They don't need to know how much money you have. They just need to know that you're okay. And now I have to tell you something I've never told anyone. A few months ago, I made a new will. Almost everything I have left will go to Imani, the house, whatever remains from the sale of the company, my assets, everything except the scholarship fund and a portion that will go to a fund for workers' widows. And Imani doesn't know. I don't want her to know. Someday, when I'm gone, an attorney will explain it to her. And I know exactly what she'll say. She'll probably be angry. She'll probably say she never wanted my money. And I know she'll mean it. That's precisely why I'm leaving it to her. I put $6 million into the hands of 3 people who knew a truth about me and chose to hide it. And now I'm leaving what remains to the one person who discovered the same truth and chose to come to my house and tell me, I know who my dad is. People tell me I lost my children. I don't agree. Takes A. I had 3 children. 2 of them made a decision about me and kept silent for years. The third made a different decision in a matter of seconds. Blood didn't decide who my family was. They did. And if there's one thing I've learned at 62, it's this. Watch what people do when telling you the truth could cost them something. That's when you really learn who someone is. Everything else can be a lie. Documents can deceive. Words can be rehearsed. But decisions reveal who a person truly is. So I want to leave you with a question. If you had been sitting where I was, would you have given Bryce money again, or would you have done what I did? Because I understand something now. The money was never the real loss. The real loss was discovering that some people had decided how much my love was worth before deciding how much money they could get from me. And yet, in the end, one person reminded me of who I was. She didn't need my blood. She didn't need my money. She only needed to sit beside me and tell me the truth. And to me, That is worth more than any 6 million trust.